Hello, and thank you for joining us for another pre-concert conversation for our Soundwave series. We have a very special concert this weekend featuring our percussionists of the orchestra. So all pieces for a percussion ensemble led by our principal percussionist, John Shaw. Thanks for joining us, John.
Thanks.
So John, tell us about percussion ensemble. How do you make music with just percussionists?
Well, it's actually not that hard. It's not a group that's been written for traditionally as much as, say, a wind quintet or a brass quintet or a string quartet. The music for percussion ensemble has largely started to develop and evolve over the 20th century, but there's so many different sounds that we've got at our disposal, so many different instruments.
Right, as you can see,
yeah,
just
as you
the
can
smattering
see,
behind us.
right.
This is not even all of it.
Right. So we have things basically broken up into non-pitched percussion instruments like drums, but some drums are pitched. Timpani can be tuned, so you can have actual notes and pitches that change there. And then we have the keyboard percussion instruments, which are to your left over here, and those are your xylophones, your marimbas, chimes, vibes, glock. So all of those can carry a melody, so there's a lot of different combinations that you can write for.
And the first piece that you're going to perform is by Joe Tompkins. He's a percussionist living and performing in New York City. He's had works commissioned by the New York Philharmonic, Cleveland Orchestra, Atlanta Symphony percussion sections, and it's called Trio in Rudimentary Style.
Trio in a rudimental style.
In a rudimental style,
Right.
Thank you. And that's that doesn't mean it's basic.
No, it doesn't mean it's basic. When you go back to the history of drumming, a lot of it has a military beginning. So in the fife and drum corps of the Revolutionary War period, usually young boys would play the drums, and in order to teach them the rudimentary beats or the rudiments, there are little snippets of very basic beats, different length rolls, flams, things like all the things with funny names like paradiddles.
And it was paradiddle. Everybody loves a good
Everybody
paradiddle.
loves a good paradiddle. And they sound sort of like what they are, paradiddle, paradiddle. You're doing a double stroke at one point. So they would teach these young boys their rudiments in these little snippets like this, usually taught by rote. And so a lot of our heritage comes from that. And so Joe wrote this piece that kind of harkens back to that style. We're playing with a traditional grip like you would play in a fife and drum corps. And we're playing, but it's a little bit more drum setting. So we've used a bass drum and a snare drum. And it just has the style that you would hear from the old fife and drum corps. It was actually a piece commissioned by the New York Philharmonic percussion section and premiered by them.
We have a little video snippet of it. You can hear that now. And the next piece is by Allison Loggins Hull. It's called Hammers. Allison Loggins Hull is a flutist and composer living in New York City. She's the founder of a duo called Flutetronics, which was praised by the Wall Street Journal for redefining what the flute can be. And this is for percussion section and flute. You'll be joined by our principal flutist, Clay Ellerbrook. So tell us about this piece.
I liked this piece when I first heard it because I liked the jazziness of it. I liked the combination of percussion instruments with flute. It's not a combination that you hear very often, but it's really cool. So it to me, harkened back a little bit to some of the soundtracks you might hear on some movies from the 1960s or something like that. Very New York, very jazzy. It's got a lot of groove to it. And it has a little bit of a construction site sound while
Right.
still being sort of mellow and groovy at the same time.
Yeah, she said she was inspired by the construction noise of New York City when composing it.
Yeah, so you can definitely hear that. But it's just got such a neat energy and a neat vibe to it. I think the combination of instruments is really interesting. We use a small bass drum, a few tom-toms, a snare drum with a cowbell, and a single timpano. And if you wanted to know
What's the difference between a timpani and a timpano?
Well, timpani, I'm glad you asked. Timpani are plural, just like cacti. And there's cactus is a single. So timpano is a single drum out of the set of timpani.
Right. I'm glad you didn't say it was a single timpani.
Yeah, that's true. I have to use the correct grammar. Right.
Well, our next piece is by a composer named Harry Brewer. And we have two pieces of his, Xylophonia and Backtalk. Harry Brewer was a renowned xylophone player, and from the 1920s all the way through the 1970s, played on many, many recordings, NBC radio, and these are quite charming little pieces for xylophone quartet with a little marimba thrown in.
Yeah, actually, one of the pieces, Xylophonia was actually written by Joe Green.
Oh.
Backtalk's written by Harry Brewer. And yes, the xylophone was an immensely popular instrument, believe it or not, in the 1920s, 1930s, in the early age of radio. And Joe Green and his brother George actually provided the soundtrack to the first Walt Disney cartoon, Steamboat Willie. And so they had a history with that, but then they also appeared on the radio a lot playing xylophone. Harry Brewer also appeared playing xylophone. And so these pieces, which are written for a xylophone solo, have accompaniment from three marimbas, which is the larger cousin to the xylophone. It's deeper in range, lower notes, it rings a little bit more, it's more resonant, whereas the xylophone is higher, more bright, and shorter sounding. And both of these are delightful little tunes, almost in, I guess, homage to Joe having provided sound effects for movies. Dave is going to have a little bit of an extended duck call solo in the middle of Xylophonia, which kind of also pays homage to the fact that we're the ones called upon to do sound effects all the time. So we threw a little bit of that in there.
Well, at least you'd hear a little bit of that. Let's hear a little bit of that. And the next piece of music is by David Skidmore, his ritual music. Tell us about David Skidmore. What is this piece about?
Well, I don't know if it's really so much of a programmatic piece in terms of what it's about, but it does evoke perhaps the sense of a ritual and maybe some sort of tribal accompaniment to some sort of a ritual. So it's very powerful, very drummy on the beginning and the end of the piece. And in the middle, there's sort of an evocative marimba trio that happens, and almost played in rounds, but still with the same sort of rhythmic drive that the rest of the piece has. So it's very driving, it's very powerful, and it was first premiered, I think, with a dance troupe in Chicago, and I would have liked to have seen some of the dance accompaniment to that, because I'm sure it's something that you could choreograph very well to.
Maybe in a non-COVID time we'll get some
so,
dancers and play it again. So the next piece is by a composer named Nathan Dougherty. It's Labyrinth of Light. And this is an unusual combination, although not unusual for your household, of marimba and harp. And you commissioned this piece by him because you want to play some music with your wife, our principal harpist, Anna Kate Mackel. And so this is one of many pieces you're looking to commission for this, but tell us about the genesis of this.
Well, yeah, you're right. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff already composed for harp and percussion, and so I reached out to this friend of mine, Nathan Daughtry. He's a composer in North Carolina and teaches college up there too. And he writes a lot of percussion compositions, but also he writes a lot of things for other instruments as well. And so we wanted a piece for marimba and harp because I thought the combination of the two instruments would go well together. And so he wrote a really beautiful piece. It's very ethereal sounding. The combination of the two instruments is really nice. And we are really happy with it. So we first premiered this at the Eastern Music Festival in 2018. And so we're excited to get a chance to play it in front of a Florida orchestra audience at this point. And yeah, we've started to try to engage some other composers in terms of writing for different kinds of percussion with harp.
So we finish our program with probably the most familiar composer that we're going to feature as Christopher Rouse, his piece Kuka Ilimoku. And this is for percussion quartet. It was commissioned by the Syracuse Symphony Percussion Ensemble. And it's written for 4 multi-percussion setups using a total of 54 percussion instruments. A lot of stuff to juggle in this piece.
Yeah, it's a lot. We all have a huge multi-layered setup. Combinations of woods, lots of wood blocks, temple blocks, log drums, and what is a log drum? Well, basically, a log drum is supposed to be a hollowed out log with a little bit of a carving across the top with an opening so that when you hit the part that's open, it has sort of a round hollow sound. Now, in modern times, we make log drums more or less out of a box, and then we cut a little top. Yeah, a tongue. So this combination of wooden sounds like that, along with metal sounds, various gongs and cymbals, and then of course your membranophones, the drums, both pitched and unpitched.
Yeah, this piece is a real, sort of gold standard for percussion quartet writing. Very popular piece, renowned composer. Christopher Rouse writes about the piece. In Hawaiian mythology, Ku is perhaps the most fundamental and important god, occupying a place similar to that of Zeus in Greek mythology or Odin in Norse legend. Ku is manifested in several forms. As Kuka Ilimuku, he represents the god of war. Thus, this work for percussion ensemble is best viewed as a savage, propulsive war dance. And it does get quite savage at times. It's loud. If you want to hear some percussionists really hit stuff hard, this is a good piece to listen to.
This is our rock and roll moment, that's for sure. It's savage at times. It backs off a couple of times in terms of dynamics, so it's not non-stop bang. But it is very evocative of a war dance. It's very evocative of the South Pacific. The log drums bringing a lot of that. Also, an instrument called the boobams, which are a series of tubular drums, maybe about this big, and they extend different heights, just like you would see some different sized pipes on an organ. And the longer the pipe is, the lower the pitch is. So you can tune them to actual notes. You could play a scale on them or play jingle bells if you wanted to. You can actually play melodies. And it is very evocative of the South Pacific when you hear it.
Well, thank you, John, for putting this beautiful program together. It's full of rich and varied types of sounds. It really shows the breadth of what percussion instruments can do, from beautiful sonorous melodies to rock and roll, bang the drums, kind of Christopher Rouse. It's a really wonderful program, and I hope you all can join us 5 p.m. this weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, for this Sound Waves concert. Thanks, John.
Thank you.